Hi, everyone. This is Ray Luskin, artist, author, activist, and the creative mindfulness mentor. And today we have another episode for you to listen to of Women Who Dare. And I am so excited to bring to you Rabbi Rachel Bregman. She's a new friend. I just met her recently, but I fell in love with her and her teaching. So I wanted to share her with you. She was the first woman rabbi at Temple Beth Tiffiloh.
Tequila, it rhymes with tequila.
Oh, well, good. In Atlanta for 3 years, has been leading a synagogue in Brunswick, Georgia for 8 years. I love this quote. I've always been a social justice junkie. Bregman, a Boston native, said describing herself. She noted how she ran a soup kitchen and has done some amazing work in the world. I think I'm going to have her tell you about it rather than me talk about, give it. So, hello, welcome. And
thank you.
Why social justice?
It's always been in my family's mindset. So I grew up in a household where we regularly took in people who needed a place to go. I grew up with a foster sister. We housed a woman who was delivering a baby she was giving up for adoption to a family near us, and she was from out of town. She lived with us for her third trimester. We had a cousin who lived with us we always had people in our space because somebody needed a place to go and we had it. And that was just the mindset of my family and also the congregation I grew up in. So I grew up at Temple Beth in Sudbury, Massachusetts with Larry Kushner.
Oh, I like Larry Kushner. Yeah, okay.
I like him too. He's also quite an activist in his own right. And I grew up watching him do activism around Jews who were trapped in Russia, around immigrants who had nowhere to go. I think I'm allowed to say this now, we secretly hid a family in the synagogue for some time. And the synagogue, shortly after I left, went on to open the Metro West free clinic. So they do a free medical clinic, right? And that's how I grew up. It was just always what we did. It just was always there. It was just part of being.
It's so interesting because I was Jewish, but that was, my parents were into philanthropy and doing good work. And it was, Tikkun Olam, and it was, make the world a better place. But that was about as far as it went. They were active in the community, but Judaism itself was not a big part of our lives. We went to holidays twice and I got confirmed. It came to a point where I asked my parents, I had changed schools and I went to another for high school and everybody's getting bas mitzvah. And I said, well, can I do that? She said, well, you have a choice. You need to go to art school or go get a bas mitzvah. And I chose art school. So it was never pushed in that sense, but there was that one identity, that has stayed with me. That has been a core value of mine forever, so, being of service, making a difference, making the world better. So I relate on that level. Yeah. They did stuff in the community, but I can't say that they ever brought anybody home. That was not part of that was like, they set up sort of a barrier of fear, I think, about strangers and others. And that was part of our, the way I grew up.
Somehow, I think I really grew up that sense of barrier and fear in many ways. And I see that alive and well in my life even now. And also at the same time, we took in strays. We took in stray people who needed homes. And all those experiences were extraordinary and they were amazing. They were beautiful and they were wonderful and challenging and hard, like deeply meaningful. And so somehow that's also in there, right? That's also in the mix. I don't know what totally activated me. I think I take the activism to a different kind of lived out level than my family did. And I don't know what totally activated me in that space. I think it's really rabbinical school. I was
now your background is, I may be wrong because I've been looking at so many, people, but you also started with psychology, right? And art. Mm-hmm. So it was like, okay, so how did you go from psychology, art to rabbinic school?
Great question. So I started off, it was a very lost soul when I graduated from high school. I went to the University of Rochester because my older brother was there. I hated it. It was not the right place for me. And I was scared to drop out of college and take time off because I thought I would never go back. And I definitely grew up with the mindset of and then you're going to college, right? Like that was like a non-negotiable. So my mother worked at Boston College, and I had access to free tuition at BC. And I thought, well, if I'm going to hate college, it might as well be free. And it turns out that BC was an extraordinary place for me to be. I made amazing friends. I got really such an education. I mean, just such a great education from the Jesuits. And because it was a Catholic school, because it is a Catholic school, it really pushed me into identifying as a Jewish person in new and different ways. So, and it was, I was early on being an adult. So I began working. There was a Jewish Students Union at Boston College. I was the vice president because I was the second person to sign up. That lasted not very long for me, because very quickly I realized that being so publicly Jewish in that space made me very vulnerable to a wide variety of anti-Semitism. And I didn't want that. I wasn't interested in that. It wasn't something I wasn't activist about that at that time.
Right. I'm curious, Rachel, if you don't mind sharing your age, because I'm 71, and when I grew up, it was, my best girlfriend went to college and the girl says, "Where are your horns?" And that was the prevalent attitude. It's like, oh, Jews, I've never met anybody. Where are your horns? So, there is differences as time has gone on. Hopefully people aren't still asking that, but yeah.
So I'm 45. And when I was in college, 20 plus years ago, I once or twice had people ask me about my horns and tail. So I had those experiences. I had 2 guys who lived on my floor in my dorm, who one of them, his initials were KKK. So just, so you know. And I would walk up, and I remember this one day I walk up and these 2 guys they're like, "Oh, here she comes, right? Here comes the Jewish girl." And they say, "Hitler was really an extraordinary leader. He just was brilliant." And they start waxing poetic about Hitler's leadership. And I was like, yeah, he was an amazing leader. Too bad that he was a total narcissist and a completely evil human being. I was like, what? I'm not sure why that's supposed to upset me, but okay. So, I mean, I faced a lot of that, and I really withdrew from the public space. And so I started working as a youth group advisor. I needed a job. I knew it was going to let me meet other people who were my age that were Jewish, which I wanted a community. And when I graduated from school, I had a degree in human development and psychology from the School of Ed at Boston College. And I had a minor in studio art and in biblical studies. And I had no qualifications to work in the world other than to go to graduate school. So I started working in the Jewish world, and that's really how I ended up becoming a rabbi. I was a youth group advisor. I taught Hebrew school. I was a secretary at a synagogue. I had a part-time gig at a financial litigation law firm in the John Hancock Tower in Boston. That was my non-Jewish gig. And I just cobbled together a life. And somewhere in there, concurrent to my being in Boston at this time, Boston started to professionalize the youth educator position. So they recognized that us youth group advisors had such an impact on the kids, and we were children teaching children, and we didn't know what we were doing. So they started to educate us. It was a great grant that came out of Boston. And so I got to get more education, and it turned into a full-time job, and I loved it. And I realized, I sat down with my rabbi, Dave Thomas, who came to be the next rabbi at Bethel in Sudbury. That's where I ended up working. And he says, "What do you want to do, what's your purpose?" And I said, and as we talked about it, we came up with this line that I want to shape and nurture Jewish souls, right? I knew I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to be a therapist, or I wanted to be a rabbi. And he's like, well, they're all the same job. Just, do you want to work with relationships, bodies, or souls? And I said, souls. And I think that sense of purpose, that sense of direction has stayed with me throughout the last 25 years. And I would reframe it now and say, I want to use Judaism to shape and nurture souls. A lot of the souls that I interact with are not Jewish. I live in Southeast Georgia. That's a thing. And so off I went to rabbinical school, and I did a year in Israel. I stayed for a second year in Israel. I studied at Pardes, which is a progressive Orthodox yeshiva, which is incredible learning. I did a bunch of things with the conservative movement. And I got really mad at the conservative movement because at the time they weren't ordaining people who are gay or lesbian. No, they were doing women were in by then, but you couldn't be gay, you couldn't be lesbian.
Okay.
And I just got so mad about it, and I just kept getting into fights with the conservative movement people. Like I was studying at the conservative movement, and I quit. I couldn't bear it. And then I came back to the States, and I got involved with the military. I was a chaplain candidate in the Navy while I was in rabbinical school. And I got involved with the soup kitchen at HUC in New York. So my rabbinical school is Hebrew Union College in New York City. And I loved my Monday nights where I ran the front of the house in the soup kitchen for 2 years. And I got to interact with all of the guests, and I got to interact with all the people who came and volunteered. And I wanted to quit rabbinical school at some point because I was like, what am I doing? I don't belong here. And so I went to quit, and one of my professors convinced me to stay. He was like, have you paid for the semester? I said, yes. He's like, do you have financial aid? I said, yes. He goes, do you know what else you're going to do? I said, no. He's like, so why don't you finish so you don't have to pay back all your financial aid, and then you can quit, and you can quit in 2 months. Okay. And of course I didn't. During that time, I really recognized that I was able to sit in these spaces with these homeless men, mostly. That's mostly what we had. And I could sit and talk with them about their homelessness, about their drug addictions, about the challenges that they had faced in life. And I was okay. And I recognized that not everybody had that gift to be able to hear and bear really hard things and then go home and be all right. I mean, there's still a lot of internal work you have to do there, but like I was okay. And I thought, this is a reason to be a rabbi. And I think that's probably really what activated me to reach out far, to go into some really challenging spaces. And from there, I think my persona as a justice junkie, as I like to refer to myself, really took form. And I went and did all kinds of crazy things, because then I just like, okay, I got to go to the hard places. So I traveled internationally. I worked for, I checked out a sewing collective in Rwanda to see if they were going to be the recipients of a grant from some Jewish organization back stateside. I went and volunteered in Uganda with an organization that was trying to do education. I got involved with Catholic Jewish interfaith dialogue. I got to go to
you have traveled the gamut of different, social justice issues, humanitarian issues. I think that's really huge, because sometimes we all get stuck in the one area that we like. I was always interested in ending abuse across the lifeline, but then all of a sudden it was sex trafficking and other things have been brought to my attention. And that has been a big part of my work in the last, number of years and stuff. Beautiful. So, yeah.
When I left New York, I was switching from hunger and homelessness to human trafficking. I was in Atlanta for 3 years. I did a lot of human trafficking work there, which was really much harder, like a whole other level of scary and hard and challenging.
Were you out on the streets working with women? I mean, I or not, or you were just doing advocacy work? What, because there's so many parts to this, it's direct service. There's not. I mean, one of the other people who I'm interviewing is Brenda Myers Powell, and she's from Chicago, and she was a prostitute. And so she got off the streets, and she's written a movie. She's been a part of a documentary, but she's about going out in the street and getting these girls off, and then she just wrote a book. So there's lots of pieces to this, whether it's advocacy to stop the guys who are advertising in the papers or whatever. There's so many parts to it that we don't even recognize, there's a lot to do.
I was doing a lot of education work, and the reason it was so scary was, first of all, I lived in Atlanta, which is a hub of human trafficking. And so I knew a lot about where it went on. So I knew I was just sort of in the milieu, which was frightening for me. And I learned it actually when I was in New York, because I was living in Astoria, Queens, and I had started learning about trafficking, and they talk about like the biggest trafficked neighborhoods. And one of them was like 2 blocks from my house. And I was like, oh my, I was a runner, and I would run through there and be like, terrible things happened here last night. Like it was just in my my airspace. The scariest thing that I did when I was in Atlanta around human trafficking is I stood up at the Temple, which is a legacy institution extraordinaire. And I said, the Johns, the people who are paying for sex, are white, middle, and upper middle class men. They're likely the people sitting here in this room. And if it's not you, it's your friends, which was a terrifying thing to say.
Oh, I know. I've worked with something called JCast here with Jewish JUF at the time, and we had a program, Safe Synagogues, and we had those discussions. And we went into the congregations and talked about this stuff, and they're like, huh? It's like they don't want to, you don't want to admit, and then you got to think about pornography, that becomes an issue too. And how many of the men we know have gone out there and been on the street, picked somebody up, or initiated their son into, oh, you're 16, you're a man now, and
Right.
denigrated women to a point that, or bringing them to a bachelor party or whatever. And so there is no boundary, and they don't even realize they are part of the human trafficking,
Right.
conversation. Yeah.
So I did a lot of that. We did a lot of Jewish community-wide education work, and I got involved with the governmental legislation pieces. I was part of a Women's Policy Institute where we wrote some legislation to help free up some, and the thing we took on was some funding to help free up funds. We took up writing legislation that freed up funds to go back into doing service for the people who are the victims of human trafficking and domestic violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then
what would you say is the most satisfying part for you of that kind of, there's so much broad education that goes on. What fills your soul when you're doing that kind of work? What piece of it?
When I feel like I'm clear on what I should be doing, not because I think I know what I should be doing, but because I'm listening, and I'm listening to the community, and I think of it as listening to the Bat Kol, right? The voice of God, like the sort of this female embodiment who like whispers in your ear. That's really satisfying. And when I'm doing things that I feel like make an impact. So when I was at the temple and I gave that sermon, there were several men who came up to me afterwards and said, oh my gosh, that's me. And it really activated them. It really got them involved in the work. And so those moments have been deeply gratifying for me to feel like, okay, I've done something that's made some kind of difference in somebody else's life.
Well, when you did the move, why did you move from Atlanta to a smaller community, as you said, that is not a Jewish community? That what prompted you to do that? And we'll get into some of the discussion about what's gone on in your community.
Sure.
Yeah.
My time in Atlanta was just very intense. And there were a lot of things that were going on in my own personal life that were very challenging. I lost a very dear friend to a cancer battle, and that was particularly devastating for me. And I needed to slow down a little bit. So I saw this job on the coast of Georgia, and I was like, well, it's beautiful. It's a nice congregation. I could go do that for, do a contract there, 3 years, relax, catch my breath, reorient, figure out what I'm going to do next, and take it from there. And that was 9 years ago. I'm coming to this is the third year of my third 3-year contract. So I'm about to sign on again. And I can't imagine leaving this environment. It's amazing.
But I love what you said about that you had to take time to do the pause, the slow down and really hear what's in your heart. And I think that's what I love about the conversations you've been leading the Spark on Morning Gratitude, and those are conversations that we don't take the time to have, like slow down, you're entitled, and that you have to do that inner work if you want to find passion and purpose in your life. So let's talk a little bit about how you are, when you slowed down and you figured this out, what were some of the pieces to that process of finding that next step or that next part of your purpose? Because I think purpose does change, depending where you are in life and what you're interested in. And, I don't think you as a core change, but the actual mission can change.
I think you're right. One of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow in Spark is about the parts about purpose that are eternal and the parts that are transitional and transactional. So yes, I think that the why of what you do largely remains fairly fixed, right? How am I a person in the world? That's going to stay still. For me, I started talking to a lot of people. I like people. I like talking to people. And I'm not afraid to pick up a phone and be like, hi, you've never met me before, but you're doing cool stuff. Can I talk to you about the cool stuff that you're doing? So I had a lot of those conversations. I took advantage of working part-time for the congregation and having opportunities to be involved with Rabbis Without Borders. I've since gotten involved with the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, right? So I was pursuing my own professional development and relationships with other colleagues, and just being in a lot of conversations with great people who I trusted, who were willing to talk to me and get into the soup with me as I sat there going, I don't know, should I stay here? Should I go? Right? Is this the right place for me? And all along, I was just building all these tremendous relationships with people in my community. And we really were making, when I got here, my position is funded, it's a bequeathment gift. So a woman who passed away wanted there to be a resident rabbi in Brunswick, Georgia. And when I first got here, I sat with her husband, who has since passed away. In my job, I'm officially the Berman family rabbinic rabbi. So I'm sitting with Erwin Berman, and I was like, okay, Erwin, you just bought yourself a rabbi. What do you really want me to do here? Right? I'm like, do you want more prayer, more justice, more culture? Like, what is it? He goes, Rachel, I want you to make Judaism less weird. And I said, okay. And so that's a lot of what I've done is.
And when you said, why don't you define less weird?
Sure.
People are going to wonder about that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thank you for that question. If you're not in Southeast Georgia, this might not totally make sense. So this man has two daughters who grew up in Southeast Georgia, and they were picked on and they were singled out because they were Jewish, because Jewish seemed so exotic, and not in a good way. It seemed weird. And I mean that with like that kind of sense of, we don't want to be that. And he wanted that to change. And so my job was to be a public person who went out and made relationships in the community, and was also the professional Jewish person in town, and got to be, I got to be normal, which is hilarious, because I don't think of myself as normal in any shape or form.
But I think you were the perfect person, having been to Boston College and experiencing it yourself, because not everybody has had that experience, and so I think, the universe provides. That's how I feel.
It really does.
You needed to have that experience so that you could then share that with the people in Brunswick. Yeah. And learn from that.
Yeah, and it's been extraordinary. So I've learned a lot about, I talk a lot here about Judaism in the time of Jesus, which is a whole world of study I hadn't done very much of in rabbinical school, and I'm now fairly well versed. Lots and lots of interfaith work, lots and lots of saying to people, let's consider calling it the Hebrew Bible instead of the Old Testament, and trying to kind of raise awareness, like how that language shapes our understanding of people. And then last year and I also was doing a lot of work. We have a very segregated community here by race, by socioeconomics, by religion.
Okay.
And so I've been doing work with some other community members, particularly clergy, to create spaces where people could come together. Because I recognize that, it's very hard to meet somebody who's not your people, because where are you going to go to meet someone who's not your people? So we started doing an annual Passover Seder. Then we would have a couple hundred people from the community come, and they would get to talk to each other. And then we started doing a community Shabbat dinner in the fall, right? And those are my earliest efforts here around racial equity. And then last February 23rd, as the world now knows, Ahamud Arbery went for a jog in his community and was chased and run down and suspected of crime because of apparently his appearance, because it wasn't for anything he was doing, as far as anyone can tell, that he was Black, that he was young, that he was physically fit, and that he was male, right? That was a four-part curse for him that day. And these men killed him, and another man videotaped it. So if you've not seen the video, please don't.
It's gruesome.
It's gruesome. It's totally gruesome. right? And 73 days later, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation indicts these people because the initial Georgia Glynn County Police didn't make any arrests, said it was self-defense, and just they were gonna let it go. So the world turned upside down, also in the middle of COVID, right? This is concurrent with COVID. And now we're all working together as clergy. We're continuing the work that we'd started before. We've brought in a racial equity trainer to work with us so that we're better versed in what it is we need to do. And right now I'm spending most of my time galvanizing sort of organizing and galvanizing our community in partnership with this leadership team that I'm a part of to create this space outside the courthouse of unity and community. It is totally peaceful here. The only violent act that's gone on this entire time has been the killing of Ahamud Arbery. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of fear around violence and looting and rioting, and none of that. It is peaceful and beautiful, and it's been amazing. I'm incredibly proud of the community of which I'm a part. And what we're doing as clergy is we're building on that extant energy, and we're trying to amplify it. And
All
really,
right, so I love the community organizing and stuff. So let's talk about how you do that. How do you amplify those feelings and get people to keep thinking peace rather than loot, or those kinds of conversations? Because I think a lot is if we choose the mindset we want to be in, if we're choosing to look for fear and diversity, or we're looking to choose for unity and peace. And how do you keep those conversations alive and get people to start thinking that way instead of get out of fear?
So I'm going to get a little brainy theoretical with you for a minute.
Okay.
Okay. So Albert Brooks is the comedian and the actor.
Right.
Arthur Brooks, who's a right-wing, a conservative think tank leader, wrote a book called Love Your Enemies. And in it, he talks about how we need to think about love as an action and not a feeling. That because of the recession in 2008, there's like a series of events that follow, which necessarily lead us to a place where the haves have a lot and everyone else has less. And that's right for the rise of a populist political mindset. And so out of that environment, you get Donald Trump and you get Bernie Sanders, who are the opposite sides of the same coin, which I find really interesting because they're so different, but also there are two populist leaders.
Right.
And so you have this, right, you have this rise, and through that rise, you start to have this polarity, particularly because Trump really pushed on the polarity, but there already existed this sense of divide amongst people. And through that divide, you start to see things like, instead of not liking each other, we view each other with a sense of disgust. So turns out, if you want to not feel disgust towards people, there's a really simple trick. It is exactly what you just said, Ray, that you just change your mindset. You look at people and say, image of God. You say, love. You say, I wish you well. You say, I hope for the best for you. And just by intentionally changing the internal narrative, that's how we bridge this gap. That's how we create the center back in our world. That's how we come together and stay together. And I don't know if this works, right? This is, ask me again in a couple of weeks how it goes. But right now, that's the place we're standing in. And we're working very hard to stand shoulder to shoulder together with everyone else who's there to wage peace. And even everyone else there, maybe who's not, but just to be there and be there together. This is an incredibly difficult time in the life of this community. Everybody is hurting. Nobody wins, right? No matter what the verdict is, nobody wins. Everybody has lost that, and we've lost incalculable things, right? That sense of the naivete around privilege and racism is gone, and thank God. And also, it's scary and it's hard for people. It's a lot to face and confront. One of the biggest things, of course, the biggest thing we lost is we lost this young man, right? This beautiful little boy who's grown up to be this incredible human being, and now he's gone. Right. One of his family members said to me this week, when all this is done, no matter what we do, we don't get him back.
Right.
I mean, that's heartbreaking. And there's just so much pain there. And then these men who perpetuated this crime, at least they've been in jail for the last year and a half. Their families are all suffering. I don't know what's going to happen in the verdict, but it seems it's possible that they will be in prison for a very long time. I mean, just the losses are building up on each other. It doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of feelings about the events of February 23rd, it hurts. And so we just want to stand together and say, I see your pain. I have my own pain. Let us at least stand together and wish each other well in this place of challenge.
Wow, I'm going to cry. That was beautiful. That was just so, I mean, we need to hear these conversations. This is how we're going to change the world. You're working in a small community, but what about everybody else in the rest of the world? You know, it's sort of like, we have to have these conversations because, you know, the one thing that you were saying is, yes, we've lost our naivete. And then we also have to recognize we all have a bias. We all have a bias, you know, and to say, oh, I'm not this, I'm not that, that's not true. You know, it's like, even though you want to be that person who never sees religion or race or gender, we do. Yeah, we're human, you know, I mean, that's part of the human experience until
part of the goggles.
Yeah, exactly. So that was beautiful.
The thing that I'm learning a lot about right now is the need to stay mindful both of the individuals who are harmed, as well as the change we want to bring is to the system, right? And we're all part of the system. We're all part of a system that is steeped in racism, that is steeped in classism, misogyny, ableism, phobias of many kinds. And these things are all the same. I mean, you were asking earlier about like, oh, that's neat that you kind of moved around to different areas of social justice. And to me, it's all the same thing. It's all about the way we look at somebody's body and
judge. Yeah, body shaming is huge, you know, and ageism, the same thing, you know. I mean, we've got there's all these different things that we walk around with, and you know, I mean, and I'm as guilty as the next person because I'm honest, you know. It's like I wish I weren't, but you know, there are moments I'll judge someone by the way they look, you know, or the way they spoke, or you know, that kind of thing. So I don't want to be that person, and I think this has opened up the dialogue. All the stuff that went down during Trump's administration, it opened up the dialogue. It may not be where I want it to be or ending the way I want it to be, but it, you know, it did cultivate new conversations. And I think that's all we can ask for at this moment is cultivating new conversations.
Right. I see that we're learning that we need to also cultivate these new skills, and they're not radical.
No,
right. It's just, it's a slow drip, right? It's water torture for our system. We're just going to keep dripping love onto a system of hate, and eventually it'll crumble and it'll succumb. And that's what we need to do. And that comes from relationship building. That comes from listening. That comes from being vulnerable. We're doing a series of equity dinners where we invite people together and we talk about issues around race, experiences around race. It's very personal experience based. And what I've really noticed is this fascinating dynamic where many of the people who are white, who are at these dinners, feel a sense of, I'm going to be respectful by just listening.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is that the people of color in the room end up sharing, and they're really vulnerable, and they're putting themselves out there, and their white counterparts aren't. And so one of the things that we really push people on is to invite the white people to be brave and to engage in the conversation about race, because being comfortable is a privilege. And it's a privilege of whiteness, it's a privilege of maleness, it's a privilege of ableism, right? Like that's what you get when you're those things. And to be uncomfortable and to be okay being uncomfortable. Like it's not going to kill you to be uncomfortable. You might say the wrong thing, but no one's going to kill you for it, not in this context. And so we practice and we do, and it's all very slow, right? I want there to be a magic fix. We're just going to change this one law and it's all going to be okay and there'll be peace in the land.
Right. Yeah.
Not how it works.
No, you know, yeah, I hear you. I've been active in the community for a long time it's been interesting as I've talked to new people who are just getting, let's say, into domestic violence and stuff. And it's like, okay, I've watched that for 20 years and I can see there have been changes. Men weren't even part of the conversation to begin with, and now they are, you know, but it's a slow pace, it just, and there's a lot of back and forth. I was sort of looking like a spiral. That's the only way. It's sort of up and down, and it's sort of what's going on at the time, to think that we have to go and fight again for Vala to be, to those kinds of things. Those conversations you wish we never have to have, or, a woman's right to choose, all that. Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of uncomfortable things to do. And that's how we make change, is by being willing to be uncomfortable with change, uncomfortable with the conversation, sitting there going, I don't really know what I'm doing. I mean, this is sort of my mantra in my head right now. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to listen really hard. I'm going to think really hard. I'm going to go slowly and carefully. I'm going to talk with my friends. I'm going to lean into the relationships that I have, and like, I'm somebody who wants to just do it. I want to go a million miles an hour, and you just can't. You can't.
Right. No, you can't. Yeah. It is just so interesting. You never know. I mean, I do believe, like what I said about you being in Boston and then going down there and stuff. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the beach early in the morning and I started talking to a woman of color, and, and we started talking, and it was and she said, oh my God, you're my ray of light. I needed to know I was on the right path. She was getting out of the domestic violence situation, and I told her where to go for therapy. She said, I just called them. It's sort of like those kinds of situations. And she's, that, you're making a difference, and we were talking about telling your story and how important it is to share your stories, even when they're uncomfortable, again, that word, because if you don't tell that story, that truth, that secret, nothing can change.
Right. Secrets have power. Secrets have power. And by taking things out of the place of secret, which is the uncomfortable part, you take the power away from them, right? I'm afraid that I'm going to say the wrong thing when I walk up to that person of color on the beach, and that's my secret, right? That's my shame and my secret. And so I'm not going to do anything, but then you miss that opportunity for that amazing conversation.
I know. We had, it was 15 minutes. It was a God conversation. That's what I call it. But people are angels on earth. We're here to talk, to meet, to find out, to share, and to make a difference. And you could say, oh, I'm not going to talk to anybody today. We see that person. And I've had that experience with a homeless man in my past. It's like I was scared to talk to him. And then when I finally did, oh my God, he's the most educated person who chose Judaism. And it was like, oh my God. And and I learned all this stuff from him that I didn't know. We have to make that choice to be uncomfortable and say, okay, even if they look scary sometimes, and I never want anybody to get in a harmful situation, because there are people who are mentally ill and you don't know. So you have to be very careful.
There are people who are dangerous, even without mental illness, for sure.
But when you can get in conversation, it not only you allow them to speak, but it changes you, and in profound ways that you aren't even aware of at the time.
Right. It's the thing. I used to push the kids that would come to the soup kitchen. They were 8th graders. And I was saying to them, it was a two-way street, the experience they were going to have by going into the soup kitchen. And I would ask them before what they thought they were getting out of it. And they could never understand it. Right? This is privilege. I'm not here to get anything. I'm here to give. I think altruism, the idea of altruism really hurts us in this way. And afterwards, I would say to them, like, what did you get? And all of the kids would sit there and be like, oh my gosh, I had the most amazing conversation. I learned this thing about this person. I whatever it was. And it, humanity is a gift. Connection is the point of being people together on this planet, is that we can connect. I mean, that's what it's really so much all about. And they, I think when we think about giving and taking, we think about much more material things. And the reality is that any exchange that you have with another person is just such a, when two people come together, that's where God dwells. I mean, that's just sacred.
And I wrote a poem, which I can send you later, but it's the power of one, and it's about, we may not have anything, but we can smile, we can give attention, we can listen, we can give a hug, we don't have to change the world, but those interactions, those connections can change lives, and I do believe there's a tipping point, the theory that if there's so many people who believe in love and the world it will tip the others, that there's this energetic field that will shift. So
water torture. Yes. Yeah. There's this great teaching by a Hasidic master, and I'm sorry, I can't pull it up at the top of my head, who said, when I was young, I wanted to change the world, and I was unsuccessful. And so I tried to change my city and I was unsuccessful, and I tried to change my town and I was unsuccessful, and I tried to change my family and I was unsuccessful. And now that then in middle age, I tried to change myself, and I realize now that I'm old and I'm wise, that by changing myself, I changed my family, which changed my community, which changed my city, which changes the world.
Well,
So there's this beautiful balance between, right? The commandment says, love your neighbor as v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, right? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. So you have to do that internal work, right? Of loving yourself, whatever that means for you. And that allows you to do the external work of loving other people. And it goes both ways. And it's so important. And we just, in our privilege, I'm not sure who the hour is, but in our privilege, we look around and say, right, I got to love my neighbor. And it's all about what am I going to put out there? And it's about, I'm going to donate to, I'm going to serve lunch one day at the soup kitchen. Like, yes, those things are important. And also, what do I need to learn here? What do I need to receive? How do I need to be transformed by this experience? And those experiences are transformational because you're letting yourself come close together with other human beings by being vulnerable in a space with another person, by not just sitting back and just listening and just,
right. I think every interaction and everything we do, it's who do I become in the process? That is really the question. And that's also, that's why I always talk about passion and purpose and having a vision and thinking about what would you love to create? What would you love to experience? What would you love to give? Because then if you start thinking about, well, who will I become in that process? That's the key. That's that inner work. That is really what will allow you to live the vision, the life you want.
Yes. And I think it's absolutely the place where purpose comes from, because it becomes the through line, right? Who am I in this space? What am I here to do? What does the world need from me in this moment? And that's in some ways always changing. And in other ways, it's not, right? We like to joke as rabbis and as clergy as a whole, right? You have one sermon and you basically give the same sermon over and over again through the entirety of your career. We're very sorry to our congregations because they just get the one sermon the entirety of our career. And for me, mine's always been relationship. It's always been relationship. And no matter what I learn and what I do, I can see that that's the place that keeps coming forward for me. It doesn't mean it's the only truth. It's my truth, right? That's my truth to work with in the world, for me to struggle with and to wrestle with in the world and to bring into the world. So going back to my original purpose statement, right? I want to shape and nurture Jewish souls, or now I want to use Judaism to shape and nurture souls. That's only in relationship. You can't give out Judaism like a cookie.
Right. Yeah, it's not like, let me stand on the stage and I'll just tell you. Yeah, right. It doesn't work that way. You got to break down the walls, the barriers, and do that. Right. Well, Rachel, this has been wonderful. So I so appreciate this conversation. It didn't go in the direction I thought it would, and I loved it even better. So, so thank you so much. Are there any final words you'd like to share?
Be brave, be willing to be vulnerable, put yourself out there, and love people. Love people as an action, not as a feeling. Love people as an action.
Thank you again. So I always like to end with a quote. So I'm going to do this today. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams, Eleanor Roosevelt. And you have a beautiful dream. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a real treat and a real pleasure for me. So thank you for inviting me. It's meant a lot.
You're welcome.
I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yes.